Hello everyone, my name is Heidi Flores-Montiel and my research mentor is Dr. McMullin-Messier. Today I will be presenting my research on climate fiction films, specifically looking at the films The Day After Tomorrow and WALL-E. So first off, what is a climate fiction film? Well, climate fiction, or Cli-Fi, has become an emerging genre that has grown in popularity with the rise of environmental issues. Cli-Fi is used in many different forms of media, including literature, cinema, as well as gaming. Cli-Fi films were first experimented with in the early 1970s following the publication of Cli-Fi literature such as The Population Bomb, as well as the first ever Earth Day in 1970. So a film I chose to look at was The Day After Tomorrow, which is a science fiction disaster film directed by Roland Emmerich, a German film director. He is famously known for popularizing disaster films including Independence Day and Godzilla. The premise of this film surrounds the idea of extreme weather events occurring as a result of the disturbance of the North Atlantic Ocean circulation. The extreme weather leads to a snowball effect, and global cooling leads to an ice age, as you can see on the poster of the film. And the film takes place in 2004, the same year the film was released. So another film I chose to look at is WALL-E, a science fiction animation film directed by Andrew Stanton, an American animator and film director working under Pixar Animation Studios. Other films that he is known for include A Bug's Life and Finding Nemo. This film takes place in the future in the year 2805 and follows a robot, WALL-E, who is the last robot on Earth and is tasked with cleaning up the garbage left behind. So, The Day After Tomorrow and WALL-E might seem like very different films at a first glance, like they don't relate to each other, but at the core of these films, they both try to portray the future environmental issues that the world might experience. In The Day After Tomorrow, the film portrays an apocalyptic world attributed to natural disasters triggered by climate change. In WALL-E, the Earth is portrayed as uninhabitable as a result of climate change caused by consumption. The reason I chose these films was because they are popular among all audiences and not just science fiction moviegoers, and they were both blockbusters at the time they were released. Personally, WALL-E made a strong impression on me at a young age, and it made me concerned about climate change. And this concern for the effects of climate change led me to grow a love for the environmental advocacy and film. And overall, I wanted to focus on climate fiction films because I wanted to see the intersectionality between film and climate change and how it can be used as a tool to be one step closer to solving climate change. So as a result, I conducted my research with the following question in mind. To what extent do climate fiction films influence public perception of climate change? And in order to answer this question, this research study used quantitative methods by conducting a survey to understand the extent climate fiction films influence people's perception on climate change. Students at CWU were chosen as a target population because they're likely to be aware of climate change since the university has frequently incorporated more sustainability courses in different departments such as the economics and construction management majors and not just environmental science majors. Another reason why I chose CWU students is because college students are typically frequent moviegoers and have streaming services to view these films. The survey was conducted through Qualtrics, an online survey software. The survey consisted of 16 questions, and they were multiple choice and open-ended questions. The survey was distributed by emailing professors at CWU asking if they were willing to share the survey's link with students in their class. The survey was also distributed through social media, including Instagram, with CWU affiliated organizations such as Environmental Club, and they were reached out by using direct messaging, and they were asked to share the link with their followers. The survey was available for 2 weeks, from April 25th to May 9th. And while the intended number of respondents was 100 people, there were only 51 survey respondents. And so now I will be showing you the results of the survey. As you can see on this slide, the predominant age of the respondents are in the age range of 20 to 21 years old. The second largest age range was from 18 to 19 years old. And as we can see, most of the people who took the survey fell within the typical age range of someone pursuing their bachelor's degree. And participants were predominantly associated with the College of Science with an overall 83.33% in the College of Science, as you can see on the slide. So one of the first questions participants were asked was if they'd watched any of the 15 most popular Cli-Fi films. As shown on the slide, the data shows that WALL-E, Interstellar, and 2012 were the most popular among the participants, and Day After Tomorrow was 5th on the list. Participants were also asked to select the film that have changed their views on climate change. The pie chart depicts how participants responded. WALL-E was the most chosen film that has changed their views on climate change. Another large portion of the pie chart shows that about a third of the survey's respondents' view on climate change were not affected by watching any of these films. And this was significant because it shows that many Cli-Fi films do not directly impact one's view of climate change. However, it also shows that changing one's view on climate change through watching a Cli-Fi film is possible, as seen with WALL-E. Participants were then asked to further explain why and how the films they chose changed their view on climate change. Some of the common themes that were presented in the participants' answers included that the films gave insight into the future, it instilled a sense of urgency, and/or the film depicted waste and pollution in an impactful manner. A specific comment that stood out to me was, quote, "As a child, WALL-E informed me that the issues of climate change existed in a manner understandable to 5-year-olds." End quote. The reason this stood out to me is because even though the film was an animated children's movie, it was still able to effectively inform about the consequences of climate change. Participants were then asked specific questions comparing The Day After Tomorrow and WALL-E. One of the question participants were asked is which movie is more effective in informing audiences about the effects of climate change. Similar to the previous question, most respondents chose WALL-E. Participants also explained their reasoning for this question, and it was interesting to see how participants justified their decision for choosing WALL-E. Instead of focusing on showing the effects of climate change, participants talked about how the film was enjoyable to watch and is suitable for all audiences. This solidifies the fact that Cli-Fi films can definitely influence public perception of climate change, but only if the film is entertaining to watch and if the film is focused entirely on Cli-Fi aspects, then the film will fail to reach a large audience because it's not as enjoyable to watch. So as a result, Cli-Fi films carry a greater impact in influencing the public perception of climate change if the movie is more enjoyable to watch and is able to cater towards many different audiences. Participants were then asked about which storyline they believed was more realistic. 50% of the participants responded that WALL-E was more realistic, while only 31% of participants responded that The Day After Tomorrow was more realistic. For those who were in favor of WALL-E being more realistic, they argued that the premise of having too much garbage pollution is a current problem that we face, and if this problem is not addressed, then participants could see this happening to Earth. Also, those in favor of WALL-E stated how The Day After Tomorrow is not realistic because it ignores the fundamentals of science. So on this slide, the figure might be a little confusing at first, but I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that for those participants who have watched both WALL-E and The Day After Tomorrow, more people watched WALL-E over The Day After Tomorrow when it was first released. This might provide a further explanation for why WALL-E changed more people's views on climate change, because watching a film when it was first released means you're able to watch the movie without any external factors influencing your perspective of the film. So participants were more likely to have watched WALL-E when it first came out because the majority of the participants fall in the age range of 21 to 22. So both of these films came out when they were children, but children were more likely to watch WALL-E over The Day After Tomorrow in 2008. Lastly, participants were asked if they thought if these Cli-Fi films invoked a call to action to combat climate change. The results were fairly surprising as it was split exactly half and half. So after this content analysis, I can conclude that to an average extent, Cli-Fi films influence public perception of climate change. First, out of the 15 most popular Cli-Fi films, WALL-E was the only film that changed a large number of participants' view on climate change. The other films did not affect as many participants' view on climate change, so this proves that Cli-Fi films influence public perception to an average extent because there are films that have a large effect and there are films that have a small effect, and they balance each other out. Secondly, there are many different factors that determine whether or not a film is effective in influencing public perception of climate change. These factors go beyond depicting potential climate change disasters. As seen from the data, WALL-E was well received by participants because it was more realistic and enjoyable and therefore relatable. So participants are more likely to be influenced by a film they relate to. However, The Day After Tomorrow depicts a more dramatic climate change disaster that does not seem realistic and therefore less relatable. And lastly, based on the participants' response for whether or not Cli-Fi films evoke a call to action, it appears that Cli-Fi films are either a hit or miss. A call to action is the driving force behind the ability to influence the public's perception as it challenges a person's current way of thinking. So as a result, since these films only appear to successfully invoke a call to action for half the time, it is appropriate to claim that it is only an average extent that Cli-Fi films influence public perception of climate change. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and these are my references.